I bought the RX 7900 XTX. Was it worth it? Why did I buy it, and why did I intentionally avoid NVIDIA this time around? Long story short, this neither was a purchase for my personal gaming rig, nor one for my workstation setup that I used to produce all these videos. The RX 7900 XTX was intended for my test system, since my RTX 3090, as good as it is, no longer fully cuts it for benchmarking purposes, especially not when having to test minor differences between CPUs. More often than not, I'd run into GPU bottlenecks, and CPUs would practically perform equally as well, and that simply can't be right. So I knew something had to change, and an upgrade for my test system was long overdue. Otherwise, my CPU comparisons would simply end up being pointless in the end. Traditionally, I've pretty much always used NVIDIA GPUs for my test system, at least as far as I can remember. While I never really had any noteworthy bad experiences dealing with NVIDIA's graphics cards, I made a very conscious decision to ditch NVIDIA this time around. My next GPU would be by AMD. But why is that? Before I answer the question, I'd like to point out that I struggled with making a choice for a long time. Initially, I wasn't 100% sure whether I should stick with Team Green for this purpose, that is from a pure technical standpoint. Finally, I made the purchase in December of 2023. I'd like to give a shout out and thank Marco, once again, who helped me get a hold of one at the right price. Who knows, maybe he's watching right now. Thank you, Marco. At the time of purchase, the RX 7900 XTX, for the most part, was cheaper than a comparable RTX 4080. The 4080 Super wasn't even out back then, so it wasn't even part of the debate. Now, when looking at the results of various reviewers between the 7900 XTX and the 4080, you have to come to the conclusion that it's simply a back and forth. Sometimes AMD is better, then other times NVIDIA is ahead. In areas such as ray tracing and perhaps even upscaling using DLSS, the NVIDIA GPU may take the lead. But these are features I wasn't even intending to use, because I prefer to rely on classic 3D rasterization for my tests, and I don't want any assisting hand from upscaling either. Not to mention the FPS breaking ray tracing functionality. I keep all that disabled for my tests anyway. But I will admit, I would have actually been willing to pay the extra money for the NVIDIA card. The final deterrent for me, however, was the 16-pin 12-volt high power connector, which NVIDIA's high-end GPUs currently make use of. That's a connector that's received with rather mixed feelings within the community. There were issues with this new and fairly delicate connector right from the beginning when it debuted. Some of those have already been taken care of and fixed by their respective manufacturers, and to be fair, many cases were actually user error. Nevertheless, certain repair shops still to this day report an abnormally high amount of burned, melted 12-volt high power connectors. In other words, defective RTX 4000 series GPUs. Ultimately, just having to take the remaining risk of having to deal with these kind of issues for a graphics card that will frequently hop from platform to platform simply wasn't worth it for me. Considering how often one has to install and reinstall the graphics card on a test system, and how frequently the power connectors need to be unplugged and plugged back in, no thank you. My decision might have been different if this wasn't hardware costing well over 1,000 euros. When spending that amount of money on something, you should expect to operate or use it with fairly minimal risks of running into issues. Sure, the 12-volt high power connector may be modern and bring certain advantages to the table, but if you ask me, the connector first needs to be improved significantly in future revisions. A connector of this type should be foolproof, just as the old-fashioned PCI Express power connector currently is. And AMD did stick with these old-fashioned power connectors, for now at least. And I guess you now know my internal thought process and how I came to choose the RX 7900 XTX. Of course, purely from a performance perspective, the ideal GPU would have been an RTX 4090, which is consistently more powerful than the 7900 XTX. But so is the price, so to speak. The RTX 4090 simply was outside of my budget, especially when having to factor in purchasing additional hardware for testing. Now to the question, was the RX 7900 XTX worth it for me? I can answer this question with a definitive yes. With slightly adjusted graphics settings and respective game titles, I was able to achieve extremely meaningful results, so that very detailed CPU tests and comparisons should now follow in the near future. To mark the occasion, in December, I bought and only recently tested the infamous Intel i9-14900K together with lots of other models, and also put it up against its predecessor, the 13900K. In fact, thanks to the high performance of the RX 7900 XTX, I was able to measure minor performance differences, even though the real gaps between the 14900K and 13900K are laughable at best, practically being the same product. But I don't want to reveal too much about that yet, as my full review is coming soon. In any case, I'm very satisfied with my purchase of the RX 7900 XTX and was unable to report any issues or inconveniences with it during my long testing marathon with tons of different CPUs. As a matter of fact, I would even go as far and state that the tests went even a little smoother and thus faster than with previous NVIDIA graphics cards I owned. With that RTX 3090 and previously RTX 2080 Ti, I did experience frame drops occasionally, resulting in me having to repeat many of the test runs until I got it right. That was not the case with the AMD GPU this time, with a few exceptions. Maybe I just got lucky with the drivers. After all, in the past I did have some bad stuff happening as well. So anyway, this is not intended to be an ad for AMD graphics cards or something, nor do I mean to badmouth NVIDIA GPUs in any way. I have installed both AMD and NVIDIA cards in numerous systems to date, and will continue to do so for certain areas of application and systems. In any case, my test system ended up receiving an AMD GPU, and that's it. Don't even ask what the purpose of this video is supposed to be at the end of the day. It was simply a spontaneous idea of mine to let you have part of my thoughts and decisions. So what are your thoughts? In your opinion, did I make the right decision, or would you have chosen NVIDIA if you were me? And what do you personally think of the 12-volt high power connector? If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If not, just go ahead and hit the dislike button. With that in mind, thank you all for watching, and see you in the next one.